It's a good Sunday afternoon for Southern Sports Gumbo. We're here to kind of recap week 6. Another exciting weekend yesterday of college football. It was kind of an upset Saturday, especially in the day games. We kind of felt like it would be. When you have those Saturdays, you never know exactly what games are going to end up, with the upsets. I think we all, even though we felt more confident in Texas winning the game, I think we all felt like Florida could beat Texas this past weekend, especially in the swamp, and Arch Manning going, on the road like he did Ohio State. I think we mentioned that last week. And that certainly proved out to be true in that one. The one that came out of nowhere, though, was UCLA and Penn State. I don't think anybody could have predicted that scenario there. A team that not UCLA had played with no inspiration at all. So only reason I mention that game is, look, give credit to UCLA alums. You have Rick Neuheisel that played there, coached there, his son, Jerry Neuheisel, who's the interim coach. Give credit to them. They got him going, and they pulled off a huge upset. So, yeah, let's just go around the horn with kind of a quick recap to yesterday. And then, from that, I guess the only other thing I would recap yesterday is that I felt like watching yesterday, Miami was the best team in the country, number one. And then the second thing that really stood out to me in the other game that was played last night was Concepcion at Texas A&M is an outstanding wide receiver, and Texas A&M's defensive line showed some real signs of life last night against Mississippi State. So that would be my things that stood out for the weekend. D Mac, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm gonna start with that Alabama Vandy game. Got away a little bit at the end with the late touchdown by Alabama, but I thought overall the Vandy defense played pretty well against Bama. They gave up some big plays there, in the second half specifically. But the big thing in this game was the two turnovers by the Vanderbilt offense. If those don't happen, I don't like to play the what if game, but definitely could have been a different situation. And then the late game last night that I stayed up for was Duke and Cal. Duke got down early 21-7 with about 12 minutes left to go in the second quarter, and ended up winning, I think, 44-21. So huge comeback for them. The time of possession was a huge factor early in that game. I think through the first 17, 18 minutes of the game, Cal had the ball for about 14 and a half minutes there. And as soon as the Duke defense was able to force a turnover, that really changed the game. So shout out to Duke for that big win on the road last night at Cal. Sweets, what were your thoughts this weekend?
Two upsets for me. One, not big upsets, but Virginia beating Louisville, two ranked teams, and just a good football game. Turnovers will come back to get you. Louisville had a few turnovers that came back to haunt them. Hats off to Virginia. They're playing great ball. That's two big wins in a row, and they're certainly trending in the right directions. If they keep playing ball the way they are, they could be there at the end of the year in the ACC. And my second one was Cincinnati beating out Iowa State. Matt Campbell coaches hard nosed football. But Cincinnati just went out and busted them in the mouth yesterday and got it done. So hats off to the Bearcats for holding serve at home and taking it to the Cyclones. A big one for that program. A lot of good football this weekend, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Miami last night. Miami looked incredible. Their defense flies to the ball. They're fast. They're physical. Carson Beck is doing what he needs to do. He's not going out and winning games, but he's not losing them. He's going out. He's playing solid ball. He's not turning the ball over. He'll tuck it and run when he needs to. He's a tough kid. So hats off to the Canes.
So from there, we kind of want to jump next into kind of going across the conferences, the four conferences, and then the American and the Mountain West. Just from a standpoint of we're 6 weeks into the season, we're kind of starting to understand how things are going to flow. So conference favorites based on what we've seen so far, potential teams that could be a spoiler in that aspect from that. So we're going to start with the ACC. So, Sweets, what you think so far from an ACC standpoint? Who are our contenders, and who are the spoilers in that conference?
Right now, Miami is the team to beat, in my opinion, in the ACC. Like I just said, they look great. Their defense is incredible. They did a great job of containing Castellanos did okay yesterday. You know, he extended a lot of plays with his feet, but credit that Miami secondary for staying with receivers and their linebackers for keeping Castellanos somewhat contained. It was an impressive job by Miami all the way across the board. Florida State's still there. Florida State can beat a few teams. Clemson has the talent. They haven't looked good this year, but Clemson has the talent to beat teams. They looked good against the Fighting Bill Belichick's yesterday. So that was a better performance by Dabo's boys. And then lastly, Virginia. Virginia's got 2 big wins in a row, and they appear to be peaking at the right time. Those are my ACC teams. And Duke. You know, Duke surprised and looked good as well. So that's kind of my thoughts on who's who in the ACC. What do you think, DMAC?
Yeah, so I think we can all agree Miami's number one in that league. But then it gets a little interesting. I have 4 teams that I have at like a tier 2 level, and that's Virginia. You know, they're 3-0 in conference right now. Georgia Tech, who's 2-0. Louisville, who's 1-1, and then Duke, who's also 3-0. As kind of the next 3 teams in my mind. You know, as far as teams who could play spoil this year, I think Florida State, Clemson, and Cal are 3 teams that can, you know, potentially upset somebody from that tier 2 realm. So it's, you know, I mean, Miami, I don't want to say they're a lock to reach their conference championship yet through 5 games, but they're playing better football than anybody else in the country right now. You know, love what they're doing. But I don't think you can count Duke and Georgia Tech out of making some noise just yet and potentially earning a spot into that conference championship. And then, yeah, for 18 minutes, Cal looked like a really great team last night. You could even say for 32 minutes because they played a really good third quarter too. So they're a team that I could see potentially upsetting somebody. You know, they still play Virginia and Louisville this year. So those are 2 games I've got circled for them of potentially making some noise. What do you think, Kevin?
So I definitely agree on Miami. To me, they're the clear-cut number 1 team in the country right now. I like in that next tier, Virginia Tech, or excuse me, Virginia, not Virginia Tech. I was combining them and Georgia Tech. Virginia, Georgia Tech, Louisville in that next tier. I like that pairing there. Virginia and Louisville yesterday, that game could have, if they played it again, I mean, look, it was an overtime game decided by 1 score. And so I think if they played that game again, I think that's 2 really good teams, just like what we discussed last week. I know DMAC, you picked Virginia, a couple of us picked Louisville, but we all said that that was 2 good teams, and it is. From there, to me, I think the spoilers to me in that league are going to be Clemson. I think Clemson's playing better. I think Florida State could play a spoiler role in there. And then my one team that I would throw in there besides those two to play a spoiler role, and it won't be Duke, but I'm going to go with the team that won it last year, SMU, as a potential spoiler role. And here's the only reason I'm throwing them in there. So SMU host Miami November 1st. When I look at Miami's schedule, you know, they play Louisville at home on the 17th of October. And then they have that SMU game on November 1st. Outside of that, I don't think anybody, you know, can beat Miami on the schedule the rest of the year. But I do think SMU has the potential to play a little bit of spoiler in that how things play out in that conference. Let me say it that way. So from there. All right. So from there we roll to the American Conference. DMAC, what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, you know, I think you've got 3 really good teams in that conference in Memphis, South Florida, and I'm going to throw North Texas in here in the top 3. So North Texas and South Florida square off this week. So that's going to be a really good game. Then you've got Tulane and Navy. Tulane is a team that is kind of feels like they're on the outside looking in a little bit. When you break down their schedule the rest of the year, they do travel to Memphis on November 7th. But outside of that game, they've got a pretty easy path to get into the conference championship. So it is a really top heavy league with those 5 teams. kind of being the ones to compete. As far as somebody who could play spoil, maybe East Carolina could find a way to upset somebody. They play Tulane on October 9th, and then they still travel to Memphis. So they're on the road for both of those games. So, you know, don't know if they can get it done, but they would be the team that I circle outside of that top five who could get an upset. What do you think, Kevin?
So one, I really like South Florida. I have all season. So I would put South Florida, Memphis, who's playing really well, beat Arkansas at home, 6-0. And then North Texas as a team and Eric Morris coaches that team. I think all three of these teams that we just mentioned, Golish, Eric Morris, and then the coach at Memphis. I can't think of his name right off the top of my head right now, but all three of those guys I think are going to be coaching in a Power Four conference next year, in my opinion, as we see things evolve. So I put those three teams at the top of the league. You referenced Tulane, and when we were talking about them just a little bit ago before we got on, you referenced them. Tulane really has the favorable schedule, and so they could sneak their way in there. So I would put Tulane as my spoiler. I think the three best teams are are Memphis, North Texas, and South Florida. And I'm going to put Navy as a spoiler too, even though Navy's 6-0 or 5-0 as a whole and 3-0 in the conference, and actually leading the conference because they are 3-0. 3-0. So I would put them and Tulane as a spoiler with the favorites as South Florida, Memphis, and in North Texas. And then we cross over into the other league that we and the reason we're talking about this one in the Mountain West is these are the teams that are going to potentially play as the 12th seed. And then you've got UNLV and Boise in that other side. Boise's kind of out of to me, the running for being the team, but they could certainly play a role in knocking off UNLV. So I think we got a lot of excitement to watch. You got five teams, in my opinion, that could be the choice for that non-power four conference winner. And then you've got some teams in here that are good teams that could play the spoiler. Sweets, what's your opinion on it?
I'm with you guys. I think even though Navy's 5-0 and leading the conference at 3-0, I think they still are looked at as the spoiler because the meat of their schedule is on the back half. They've got Memphis, I believe North Texas and South Florida. Two of those games are on the road. That's a lot for the Navy to chew on there. If I had to pick a team today to win the conference, I would pick Memphis. They've looked really good. I've been impressed with them defensively and with the way they're moving the ball on offense as well. But South Florida and Tulane are right there as well. It wouldn't surprise me if either team, South Florida or Tulane, ran the table in conference for the rest of the year. That's a really a tight knit conference there with I think five different teams who are still who could still win it in that conference. Again, like I said, with Memphis, North Texas, and South Florida, being undefeated. Looking in Tulane is 4-1 overall, undefeated in the conference. There's going to be a lot of good football played in that conference in October and November, and whoever can survive that is looking at a probable playoff berth. Some good stuff.
And then what do you guys think on the Mountain West scenario too, D-Mac? I know Vegas is your team. You still with them?
Yeah, they've got a really good chance to run the table. They do have to they do play Boise State, and if I remember correctly, I think that game is at Boise. So that's going to be an interesting one. Outside of that, they only have two other road games the rest of the season, Colorado State and Nevada. I think, they've got a really clear path to 12-0. They can take care of business in a couple weeks at Boise. But even though they're my team in the group of five, I don't know if 12-0 gets you in over an 11-1, South Florida team or a Memphis team. So they still need a little help from that American to get there. What do you think, Sweets?
I agree with you. That the schedule's laid out for UNLV to run the table. I think they were in a similar position. They were playing well last year, and I think Boise State knocked them out at the end when UNLV was trying to sneak in. They lost that game to Boise State. They've got it going this year, but Boise State's always a tough game for UNLV. Looking at the rest of the conference, I just don't see anybody at the end of the year. Will the committee hold out a 12-0 team, a G5 team over? Or keep them out beneath an 11-1 American Conference team? That's going to be, that's going to be a tough call. What are your thoughts, Kev?
All right, so that brings us into the Big 12. And again, to me, this is maybe, well, I think going into the season, I think we all probably felt like the Big 12 might be the most competitive league. That being said, there is one team that is kind of jumping out in front of everybody and has gotten two pretty dominant wins. They beat Utah on the road in a dominant way, and then last night they handled Houston again, and that's Texas Tech. Texas Tech, to me, in that Big 12 conference is out there as a team to beat. I would also throw BYU as a contender in there, and Arizona State to me is a team. They won it last year. They're undefeated in the league, so I think you got to include them in there. It's kind of those are the three strongest teams. From a Big 12 standpoint, the ones that I like as a spoiler would be Baylor, Kansas, and Iowa State. I think all three of those teams can surprise more than one team in that top group and get some wins. And let me also throw Cincinnati in there. We talked about them, a little bit last week. Cincinnati's a good team. They've already won on the road on Kansas, beat Iowa State at home. And so, again, they obviously are playing a role as a spoiler. So I think this is a league that there's still a lot of depth in, even though, Texas Tech is jumping out there and proving themselves to be very good from that. So Tech, BYU, Arizona State to me are the favorites. And you got, four teams I think that could be spoilers in there. D-Mac, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think Texas Tech's the clear-cut number one in this league, and I'm going to throw Arizona State as the other contender. I'm throwing BYU into the pretender category. They've got a tough schedule ahead. They travel to Arizona, to Iowa State, to Texas Tech, and to Cincinnati, in the back half of the year. So that's going to be a tough schedule for them. So I don't think BYU, even though they've looked good so far, I don't think they're a team that gets in. But I'm with you on the spoilers. One other team that I think could create a little bit of noise. I'm going to throw TCU in that category, create some noise. And as much as I dislike doing this, I'm going to throw Colorado in. They're going to get a win somewhere that they've got no business winning. They're probably going to be a 4-8 team, 3-9, but they're going to get that one win somewhere that they need. So what do you think, Sweets?
Going back to BYU, so BYU has Iowa State, Texas Tech, and Cincinnati on the road still this season. So that's going to be a lot for them to overcome. I right now I like Texas Tech. They're just they're scoring points. They look good. They went into Salt Lake City and busted the Utes in the mouth. They're playing really good football. Utah is a team that can upset somebody at the end of the year. There are 5 or 6 teams in the Big 12 that can beat each other on a given Saturday. Utah and BYU are two of them, obviously, with Cincinnati, Iowa State, and Texas Tech as well. And it's like you said, D-Mac, Deion Sanders, for, love him or hate him, Colorado is better than they were when he got there. And, they show up and play. They play hard for him. And that's, you got to love that when your players will play hard for a coach. So while they don't have a chance to win the conference, I can certainly see them getting a game or two that, that you don't expect them to. If I had to pick the conference winner today, I would pick Texas Tech. I just think that they look like the most complete team in that conference so far.
All right, and D-Mac, you're right. TCU's got to be included as a spoiler in there. No question about it. They're a solid team. They played well. So from there, let's jump into the Big Ten. To me, this is a top-heavy league. What's your thoughts on the Big Ten?
Yeah, I think this team has 2 really good teams and then 3 or 4 other teams that are good. So I love Ohio State and I love Oregon right now. those are two teams playing really good football. Ohio State's only given up 9 points to Big Ten opponents this year. So, and they both square off against pretty good teams this week. Oregon's hosting Indiana. Ohio State's hosting are traveling to Illinois. So I would have Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, USC all in like that tier 2 level right now of teams that are good, but will they have enough to make a lot of noise? One team that is really trending down right now is Penn State, obviously, after a bad loss on the road to UCLA. So I don't have Penn State playing spoiler this year, but two teams that I have in a spoiler role. I've got Iowa and I've got Nebraska as two teams that could potentially create a little bit of noise in this league. I love Dylan Raiola as a talent at quarterback. And, at some point the switch has got to flip for him to kind of take a game over, and they do play USC at home later in the season, so that's one team, and then Iowa still has a couple games. They will get to host Oregon at home, and then they do travel to USC. So those are two games I want to watch closely with Iowa. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, so I look at the Big Ten again. I think it's a top heavy league, and I think your three at the top. I'm going to go ahead and throw Indiana in there until they're prove me wrong. And I say that I went into the season, Indiana would not have been in my top group. Obviously, Oregon and Ohio State are up there. Those two teams, no doubt, they can play with anybody in any league. But Indiana proved to me that they deserve to be in there the way that they handled Illinois. And then after that, in a game that, some could say, well, they didn't play as well. But you followed a big win against Illinois and you went on the road and you handled Iowa in a tough game. So I'm going to throw Indiana in there as a contender. Mendoza is probably playing at the top of, if you were to say, okay, who's my best quarterbacks in the country right now? Obviously Ty Simpson's playing really well for Bama, but Mendoza would be in that group too, best quarterback, and that's a whole nother subject. So I think you throw Oregon, Indiana, Ohio State. The Oregon Indiana game next week's going to be a great game to watch. And then I think spoilers. I like you throwing Nebraska in there because I think they're going to be. And then I definitely think Michigan will be a spoiler along with Illinois and potentially Iowa. Again, if you've got to if you're one of those top teams and you have to go on the road to win at Iowa, that's always a tough place. Their defense always shows up. And let's say, in the Big Ten, the one thing you got to also factor in is weather. So let's say you have to go to Iowa in November and it's a snowy, cold day, and against that defense, a turnover or two could change the game. So I would throw Iowa in there based on those things. But again, I really like Michigan, Nebraska, Illinois, and that aspect as that with those top three: Oregon, Indiana, Ohio State. What's your thoughts?
I agree with you guys wholeheartedly. I think Indiana, Ohio State, and Oregon are the top three teams. I think Oregon is the best team. I like them better than Ohio State altogether. It's tough to say. I mean, we're talking about the defending national champions here, but Oregon has just looked solid. Dan Lanning's got them playing good ball. Looking at their schedule, they've got Indiana at home, so a 3-7 matchup. That's going to be a great game for them. And then after that, they don't have the toughest schedule. Oregon doesn't. They've got Rutgers, Iowa, which can be a tough game in Iowa City. They've got Whiskey at home, Minnesota at home, USC at home, and Washington on the road. So if Oregon can get by Indiana, I like their chances to run the table in conference. As far as spoilers go, I like Raiola a lot. Watched him play a lot here in Georgia. I think the kid's got moxie and is a good quarterback. They can certainly spring an upset. USC at 4-1 is playing some good ball, better than I thought they would be. It's an 18-team conference, which is just insane to say. I was looking at the standings. It's 2 pages of standings. But yeah, those are my three teams. Michigan, Nebraska, spoilers, and perhaps even a USC sneaking up on somebody. I'm not as sold on Illinois as you two are. I've just never been sold on by Lima, and then getting mollywopped by Indiana just kind of sealed it for me. But there's some talent in the Big Ten, and it's going to be fun to watch that conference come down to being. That's a conference that's going to get 2 and possibly 3 teams anyway into the playoffs. What do you think about that, DMAC?
Yeah, so I do think that when you talk Big Ten, and I know we'll talk SEC in a minute, you're looking at probably 8 playoff teams between those two conferences, potentially a ninth, depending on how it all shakes out. So you're looking at potentially 4 teams from the Big Ten getting in. I would say right now Ohio State and Oregon are your 2 locks. If you go to a third and a fourth, I'd have Indiana as the third, and I have Illinois as the 6th team in that league. So I would lean probably USC as the 4th team over Michigan right now in the Big Ten.
Next week, and again, we'll go on over to the SEC, but we're really going to find out about this league next week. We've already mentioned that Oregon's playing Indiana next week, but then also Illinois is hosting Ohio State. So if Illinois wants to plant themselves firmly in the conversation, here's their chance. They got a home game against Ohio State next weekend. So if they pull that game off, they can interject themselves into the equation. After that, yeah, USC, Michigan, heck, even Nebraska. All
And
right,
guys,
so
raise your hand if you saw Penn State at 0-2, 2 games into their conference schedule. That's not something I saw. Lord.
maybe not 0-2, but I think DMAC and I were definitely firm believers that Drew Aller was not the answer and that Penn
Wow.
State would probably at best go 9-3. Aller, look, so again, Penn State 4-21 against top 10 teams since James Franklin's been there. So they're always going to win 8 or 9 games because of that schedule. If you get Maryland, Purdue, Rutgers on your schedule, you're going to Northwestern, you're going to win some of those games. But it does not surprise me that it surprised me that they lost to UCLA. Absolutely, doesn't surprise me that they're out of it. You got any thoughts on that, DMAC?
Yeah, kind of similar to you. I would not have thought they would have lost to UCLA, and I didn't have them not making the playoff before the season, with me thinking the Big Ten would get 4 teams, but I did not think they'd play for a conference championship. I figured they'd be a 9-10 win team this year, with probably their 2 losses being Ohio State and Oregon. Now they've lost to UCLA, so it could be a slippery slope for them. I also wouldn't be surprised if, their only loss the rest of the year is to Ohio State and they finish 9-3 this year, just because they do have talent. They beefed up their wide receiver room this year, which hasn't shown much yet, with Drew Aller slinging passes back there. But, at some point, the talent's just gonna have to take over for them, I think. So I still see them as a 9-3 team, even with this loss to UCLA.
Did Penn
Do you
State
think
pick
do you
the
think
wrong
they get in at
quarterback?
9-3? Do you think they get in at 9
I
and
would
3?
have them on the outside right now.
Not
I
with a
would too.
loss
I
to
was just
UCLA.
Yeah, we agree. We agree.
There'll be some 9-3 teams get in my opinion, but you can't lose to a team that bad. Here's another question with that before we get into the SEC. Did they pick the wrong quarterback? Is Prabula better than Drew Aller?
I think we're certainly gonna find that out this week in Missouri's matchup. He's looked far better so far this year, without a doubt. But they've got a big test this week too.
Certainly do. And again, I think it's the jury's still out, but we will find out soon. What do you think there, Sweets?
No, I agree. It's going to be fun to watch.
So from there, we jump into the SEC. Again, in my opinion, the toughest league, top to bottom. I don't think many people would argue that. So who do we feel like are the pretenders and the contenders in the SEC, and then the teams that are going to play the spoiler role? Sweets, what's your thoughts?
Contenders right now, huh? Lord.
Yeah.
Oklahoma.
Wow.
I mean, Oklahoma is undefeated. Mateer's out, and if they can keep the train on the tracks until he gets back, they're playing really good ball with him at quarterback. So yeah, I didn't think they'd be as good as they are. Let me say that. But Mateer's been playing. Ole Miss at 5-0 is playing well. Texas A&M at 5-0 is playing well. Texas A&M is one of those teams that th- they're winning games. They don't do anything that wows you, but they just keep winning. Missouri's 5-0. Do I think they'll be there at the end of the year? I can't see it, but why not? As far as teams that could jump up and beat a team that you don't expect them to, I mean, LSU can play a spoiler right now. Count me in for Tennessee being there at the end of the year too. Tennessee's a missed field goal away from being undefeated on the season and in conference against Georgia. So, count them in for me as well. A lot of parity at the top of the conference. If I had to pick a winner today, gun to my head, it'd be tough for me to go against Oklahoma if Mateer's healthy. If they can keep the train on the tracks and he's there at the end, they've been as good as anybody, in my opinion. What do you think, Kevin?
So I think that if you break them out into the top groups, I would have Georgia, Alabama, Texas A&M, and then I would include Ole Miss and Missouri. So I think you got to take schedules into play also in the SEC. And if you look at schedules, Ole Miss and Missouri have a distinct advantage in that they don't play the number of ranked teams that the other teams do. I think Oklahoma, like we talked about when we did our previews, possibly the best defensive team in the conference, definitely the best front seven in the conference. I'm still not sold that they can be dominant offensively. That Auburn game was, right down to the wire in the fourth quarter, and they hosted that game. Same thing with Michigan. So I also look at it as they've done what they're supposed to. I would put them in the spoiler category, and here's why. Again, that schedule piece. They go on the road to Tennessee. They go on the road to Alabama. They play Texas in that neutral site game this weekend, and they're going to have to play that game without Mateer at quarterback. And so to me, those are three very difficult games for them to win, to be. And I think at this point, you got to say, when you look at Ole Miss and Missouri's schedule, one loss, and even Alabama with what they're doing, one loss probably gets you into the SEC championship. I don't know if two does. Potentially, it could, but you're going to have some things to happen for two losses to get in there. And I just think Oklahoma's schedule's too tough for them to. I would put them in that spoiler category. I like Tennessee um, to be fighting for the playoffs at the end. I don't know that I would put them in to play for the conference championship. I think those other five I'd have mentioned, I would put in there. Here's the one thing though with Tennessee. Tennessee played that Georgia game without both of their starting cornerbacks. And if both of those guys play in that Georgia game, they probably win that game. So the one thing when you play Alabama, you're going to have to defend their passing game. So to me, when they play in the third week of October on that Tennessee Alabama game, if Tennessee has both of their starting cornerbacks for that game, that could make that a very interesting game just from a matchup standpoint. And then also, Tennessee is one of your best rushing teams in the conference. And Alabama has shown that if you're going to beat them, you've got to be able to run the ball well. So if Tennessee were to beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa that third week in October, then I think you certainly got to put them in that group of teams that could win it. So again, my spoilers, I guess, from that standpoint would be Oklahoma, Tennessee, LSU, with my five teams that I really like across that have put themselves in the best positions to win it would be Georgia, Alabama, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and Missouri. And then let me also say this: I think you also got to throw teams that can beat you. Again, just it's such a deep league. That's 8 teams you've already talked about there. I think Texas can beat somebody. I do. In fact, I think they have a good chance of beating Oklahoma with the fact that Oklahoma's playing Hawkins this week at quarterback. I think South Carolina at home has the potential to beat a contender. And they've got a couple of teams that they've got coming at home from that. So I think you still got Texas and South Carolina. And just like Florida beat Texas yesterday, I don't, if you go in the swamp, Florida's got a really good defense. And so I don't think you can say you can count them out. Again, if you look at Florida, they were in the game in the fourth quarter against LSU. But that against Miami, who's a really, really good team with 5-6 minutes to go, that's a 7-point game simply because Florida's defense is really good. And then yesterday they dominant in that Texas game. So I think you got to include Florida, Texas, and South Carolina as teams that they're not going to. At this point, I wouldn't pick any of those teams to be at the top, and I wouldn't pick them to be spoilers. But I think they have the potential to beat a good team and throw the race kind of sideways. DMAC, what's your thought?
Yeah, so I have the SEC. I've got like a top 6, a next 3, and then I'll go into my spoilers. So the top 6, and pretty close to this order, I've got Oklahoma, Alabama, and Missouri, all as like a 1A. And then for a 1B, I've got Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Georgia. Factoring in Oklahoma's schedule is definitely a good point. But right now, from what we've seen, I've got them a little bit ahead of everybody else. And then my next three teams of potential contenders, I've got Tennessee, LSU, and then Vanderbilt. Definitely all nine of these teams still have really tough schedules. But my big spoiler team is going to be Mississippi State. They get to host Georgia and Ole Miss in the month of November at home. You know, their game against Tennessee, that was a huge environment game for them. I know they ended up losing in overtime, but the way they played in that one was definitely the home field helped them a lot. And that game against Ole Miss, the Egg Bowl is always a phenomenal game. Doesn't matter how good Ole Miss is, that's always a one possession game, it feels like. So they would be my big spoiler. But if I had to pick in this hypothetical, I'm going to say 5 SEC teams get to the college football playoff. So I would take right now, I would take Alabama, I would take Missouri, I would take Oklahoma, I would take Georgia, and I would probably take Texas A&M over Ole Miss, even though Ole Miss is the highest ranked SEC team in the AP right now. Those would be my 5 teams. Yeah, I think Ole Miss still has a great chance to play for the SEC championship. But I don't know. They beat an LSU team that looked really bad. So, you know, Texas A&M does have wins over Auburn, Notre Dame, and Mississippi State. Bama's got the win over Georgia and over Vandy. So Missouri is kind of like my wild card that I threw in since their best wins over South Carolina this year. You know, going to be a tough test for them upcoming this weekend with Alabama coming to town, but that would be where I have the SEC right now. I think Tennessee's a team that also could sneak in as well as LSU, but kind of have both of those teams on the outside looking in, you know, quite a few spots back at the moment.
You
Yeah, Kevin,
mentioned
Kev, that was
Vanderbilt, and I didn't put them in there, but they definitely are a spoiler. They're going to beat somebody. 2 weeks from now, they play LSU at home, and that could be one that they get. But I think another team that we did mention that still got to be considered a spoiler because if you look at they have 2 losses in the league, but both games have went to the wire, and that's Auburn. They played Oklahoma to a one possession game and Texas A&M to a one possession game. And I didn't mention them in the beginning, but you really have to. There's still the potential for them to beat some teams, and we know at home both those games that they lost were on the road, and they had the ball in the fourth quarter in the last 5 minutes and could have won both games. They obviously didn't. They did come out and take the lead against Oklahoma and force Oklahoma to go down the field, and Mateer didn't score. So they did come back in the fourth quarter late and get the lead there. So I think you got to throw Auburn in there too. Again, it's just such a tough league. What you got
yeah,
anything else on the SEC?
So my stat on the Auburn Tigers would be Hugh Freeze in one possession SEC games is 2-9, which is why I would bet if somebody gave me a one possession game against him in any conference game this year, I would take the other team. I just don't think Hugh Freeze is able to win those close ones, and like the talent of that team's, you know, top tier. They've got a lot of playmakers over at Auburn, but yeah, I don't think Hugh Freeze can win those close ones that he needs to win. But they do get Georgia and Missouri at home and Alabama at home to close out the season. So if they are going to play spoiler, they've got 3 really good chances at home to do that.
it wouldn't surprise me to see them get at least one of those games, honestly, maybe 2.
It's a tough place to play. Auburn is a tough place to play, and their fans show up.
It's that a few years back against LSU when we were down 17-0 second quarter, that's as loud a stadium as I've been in, honestly. Kev, you were there too. You remember that place was crazy.
Yep, and if look, we don't win that game if BJ doesn't get the strip sack and a touchdown right there to give us life. We were out
Yep.
of it at that
Yep.
point in the game. They were all over us, and we were out of that game. And that swayed momentum to where we just leveled it off. And we're able to, and that was not a good Auburn team. And that was an Auburn team that cost their coach the job. And an LSU team that played in the SEC championships. It's definitely a tough place to play. So look, I mean, hey, we've talked about this weekend, had the upsets, kind of laid things out, from a conference standpoint. There's a lot of fun stuff, I think, ahead in the next 7, 8 weeks as we get, through 14 weeks of college football. But some things are starting to form, and we're starting to be able to say, to identify some things. Be interesting to see over the next 2 or 3 weeks how we feel, because I know certainly things are different. If we were to say top quarterbacks, we've done 2 quarterback rankings, and I think if we did it again, we would probably even change it again in the short times that we've done it. I know I would. I've had Simpson, I think around 9 or 10 the first time I did it. I think I might have had him six the second time I did it. He would be in the top 1 or 2 in the SEC right now. A guy that's completing 70% of his passes. I know that's rattling and getting onto something else, but it's fun. Look, college football, we love it. We watch it. It's entertaining, and it's why we're sitting here talking about it. So, you guys have any last thoughts?
Kev, you're spot on about the quarterbacks. Listen, at the first of the year, it was Nussmeier, Sellers, and Arch. Where are
Yeah,
those three now?
they're at the bottom. Well,
None
Sellers,
of them are in the top 10. None of them.
no, they're not.
You know what? Yeah, it's it's insane. So it's a lot of fun. And we're in week 5, week 6. These teams are starting to show who they are. And for teams like LSU, who still have a lot of talent and still have everything in front of them. It starts now on what they have to do differently if they're going to be a contender the rest of the way. So teams like LSU, teams like Vanderbilt, how are they going to bounce back? Those are teams that I'm going to be interested in seeing what they do over the next few weeks, how they come back after these losses and see what they're made of. We'll see who the pretenders are soon enough.
Well, that's a wrap for our weekend 6 recap here at Southern Sports Gumbo. Make sure you like, follow, share, and we'll see you guys on Tuesday.
Definitely tune in Tuesday. We've got a lot of good games to predict.
I agree. Participate.